Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, a podcast where I ask the people in comedy about what they do. I'm your host Mark DeCano, and my guest each episode will wax lyrical on the positives, wax reticent on the negatives, and wax candle on the windowsill. And that joke, while technically correct, proves that what they do is a lot harder than it looks. You can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. If you'd like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is an exciting young character comedian whose debut show Clementine was one of the smash hits of the 2023 Edinburgh Fringe, garnering a host of 5-star reviews. It's character comedian Rosalie Minnitt. Let's go for it.
Sounds good.
Tell me then, how did you first encounter comedy? Because I know that you were educated abroad. So Was comedy different growing up than it is now as a career?
Yeah, totally. I think as well, like I grew up, so my dad is from England, he's from Manchester. So we kind of grew up with that like element of British culture and British comedy at home. But I think when you grow up abroad, you kind of have this I had this really weird mishmash of influences because I was watching some weird American TV, and then I was watching like so random British things that would filter through, and then I was watching, like, I lived in Holland and I lived in Slovakia, I lived in Belgium, so I was also kind of getting weird influences from there as well. So my influence was often just sort of stuff that I found online. Like me and my sister were like early YouTube viewers. Like we were watching all of the really embarrassing YouTubers, but that was kind of my first we were watching stuff that my dad had recommended, but we were also just at anything that we could find online that we were like, oh, it's an American TV show, that we've got to watch it. And so that was kind of my first influence of it. But it was different, and I think it's quite nice now to have a bit of an outside perspective, I think, because I've kind of grown up in a little bit of a different way, and I've kind of grown up with lots of different sort of influences. I think that sometimes that does come into the stuff that I write, and I think I do kind of come in from like a specific kind of like a little bit of an outsider angle, even though I don't sound like it.
So obviously you continued your education, you went to university and you were doing the Durham Review. I mean, was that your first time performing comedy, or was there more?
Yeah, it was. So I studied history, and for me, like, I was always someone who worked really hard at school. So, you know, academics was kind of my jam. And then when I got there, obviously, like, Durham is it's a little bit of like an Oxbridge situation where there's a lot of quite intense, quite privileged kids, and often, like, I remember a lot of people as well who just sort of who had loads of experience on stage before. So like there was kids that had like been in the West End shows and had like famous parents, and I found it all really bewildering. But I did like bits of theatre there, and I kind of like tried my best to sort of filter it. My third year I auditioned for the Review, kind of on a whim really, because I didn't really think, it's so competitive, I didn't really think I'd get in. I just sort of I just threw my hat in the ring, and I got in, which was amazing. And then we had like this really amazing year of just kind of, we were a really unlikely group of people. Like the people in that specific troupe were just people that would never usually mix, which was really funny. So we all looked quite funny together. And then obviously the first shows were a bit interesting, and like I wouldn't say it was my best writing, but it was really like, it was such a great like training ground for what it's of how to learn to perform comedy and perform together and write your own jokes, and whether like, you know, risk is still pretty minimal. And I still remember some of those first sketches that I submitted at the time, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever written. And now, like, I look back and I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I performed that in front of hundreds of people. And it was funny because as well, like, I didn't really think of myself as like a particularly funny like actress. And then I did a play where I only had like 3 lines, and I was really bored because I had to be on stage for the whole time. And the play was like 2.5 hours long, and basically it came out of being just quite bitter that I wasn't in it more. And I just started like messing around, and I had this character where I literally genuinely only had 3 lines. And I just started like eating this cake in the background, and I could just completely ruin the whole play, to be honest. But it was really funny, and everyone was laughing, and I was like, oh my god, this is really fun. Like I love like playing.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of like why I was like, oh, maybe this is something to do. And now obviously like I love it. And I also can't really act now without looking at the audience, because so much of my like stage vibe at the moment at least is like looking at the audience, and it's all quite like, there's no such thing as the fourth wall. So I just think I'd find it really hard to be in a play now where I don't just sort of like side eye the audience. I'd find it really stressful. And then we went to Edinburgh, which was such an amazing privilege, because obviously it like a lot of like that was paid for by the sort of group, by the student society, which meant that we kind of got a chance to have a run in Edinburgh. And now, having like paid for one myself, I've realized what a financial like treat that was. But yeah, it was great. And it was like my first introduction to kind of learning to write jokes and learning what works on stage. And I would not be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't been in the review, which is really cool.
Yeah. So what was the transition then from being part of a troupe to being a solo artist?
Well, I think quite like a lot of people. So I graduated in 2018 now. So then I kind of graduated and I was like, oh, I'd love to do something in the arts. Like, I don't know what that looks like, but I don't really come from a family of having many connections, or any connections really. God bless. So I kind of graduated and I saw a lot of the people that I went to uni with go and get jobs in the city, and kind of bewilderingly get jobs in things that I was like, how like, just because of connections, they kind of just people kind of leapfrog you in a way that feels really confusing. And I went to go work in a bar in Manchester, and I remember being like, I remember very specifically like looking across the like BBC building, and because I was working in Salford Quays, and I was like, how do you get in there? Like, how do you do it? And I just remember feeling I was so frustrated, and I felt so like deflated, and it was like an industry that just felt completely impenetrable to me. And then COVID hit, obviously, in like 2020. So I went traveling for a bit to try and like, I didn't really find myself, but I did go to different places. And then when COVID hit, I just was like, I think a lot of people went through this where they sort of felt like, opportunities kind of shut down, but because we had so much time, I was kind of like, well, if I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to write something. I'm just going to put something together. And by that point, I hadn't really done that. I'd done a few like stand-up gigs, so I was just performing as myself. And then I remember doing a stand-up gig actually on like the open mic circuit. This was at the end of 2019, and this guy came up to me and he was like, and like I received like, it was, people were quite like, I got quite a lot of like weird sort of sexist vibes in that open mic circuit. Like, I mean, it isn't really much changed now, but I remember like a guy came up to me and he was like, yeah, I really liked your set. You've got like this real like posh girl vibe going on. And I remember being like, I hate how much you're perceived in stand up if you just go on as yourself. And I felt like kind of wanted to defend myself, and I was like, oh, I don't really know how to describe like where I come from. I feel like you've kind of misread me. And then I was like, well, if that's how they're reading me, I'm just going to go in on that completely. So then I created a character kind of vaguely like inspired by that comment, because it really annoyed me. And I was like, well, I'm just going to take control of this then. And that's why I love coming out as a character, because I'm like, well, I've made the decision to how I'm presenting and what I'm giving. And I'm not kind of, I think the thing is with stand-up is so much of it is like how you come across. And some people play characters when they do stand-up in like loads of different ways, but I just wanted to be like, no, this is what I am going for, and this is what I want you to get from this character. But yeah, the transition to the solo stuff kind of just, I just sort of put a show together. I was just so frustrated, and I didn't understand how you were supposed to do anything. And I even with all of the privilege of going to like a great uni, it still just felt completely bewildering to me. So I just put a show on. Instead of like, establishing yourself as a comic and, doing the rounds, I just like put an hour together, which is now insane. I think back to it, I'm like, that's really crazy. But I just was like, I'll just do it. So I put it on in kind of first show would have been in 2022. And then I kind of just went from there. I kind of went backwards. So I was sort of I took it to different places, didn't know at the time that I should call it a whip. I was just sort of doing a full hour, completely. I just had no idea what I was doing, and in many ways, though, I think that sometimes you've just got to do it. And I'm really glad I did it like how I did, because it went really well in the end. But also, I think I learned a lot on the job, which was good. But yeah, having said that, I would love to, like, I think I'm in a place now of wanting to like work with people again, and like I really do miss that part of like being in a troupe and working off people on stage. Like I did a show, like I compared a show with my friend before Christmas. I was at a Christmas show, and I was like, oh my god, this is so fun being on stage with someone else. And I realized that, like, because when it's just you, and you know, you might have messed up a punchline, or you might have lost the audience, it's all on you. Like, there's no one that's going to come in and help you get that energy back. And then I realized, I was like, wow, I really have picked on. So yeah, I would love to perform with people again, basically.
Well, would that be with people then as yourself?
Yeah, maybe. I'm like, there's people I have written with, and I'm writing with, and I'd love to do more of that, because it's quite hard to I think character to like be on stage with anyone else. I would have no idea how to interact with other people, because I just like physically cannot with that character. But yeah, I think that's something I'd really love to like do more of.
But you have done, I mean, we're talking about Clementine here. Your character Clementine, and we'll get onto who she is in a moment. But in that show, your Edinburgh show of last year, you do have some audience interaction in that. You bring the audience out onto the stage and have them play a small part. So is that you attempting to bring in that engagement, that working with someone else again? And have any of those moments really surprised you, what people will come up with?
Yeah, I think they have, actually. And I think the more I've like, so after I did like the Soho run, like the late night shows in Soho were like really like feral, because I'd done the show I was doing in Edinburgh was at like 2:30, which is quite early for Edinburgh. And it was definitely like, it was like, oh, it's these people's first show of the day, which I think in hindsight was quite a hard slot. And I think I coming to like then having to do the show at what ended up being like 10:30 in like central London was like a very different vibe. And very like, the audience are like interacting way more, like things are quite like out of control, and I absolutely loved it. But it was also quite scary, because like, especially I did one final show in the downstairs space in Soho, and it wasn't like I felt like I messed up so much in that show, because it was like, you know, you have to bring that cabaret energy, you have to be really quick. And I kind of felt like I had almost was performing it like theatre, and I should have just been really like, I should have been cabareting. And ever since then I was like, right, I'm going to learn my lesson from that show, because I didn't sort of play it right. And so for the past few months I've just been doing loads of gigs where I've kind of tried to be like really free and easy with it, where I've got like a set in my mind, I've got jokes, but I also kind of want to let the character breathe a bit. And it's been so fun. Like, and I think I've gotten better at it, of being like, right, because it's hard when you've kind of got a script and you're like transitioning between being like improving and then going back to the script. I've done a few gigs recently where I've just had like so much fun playing with the audience and like people, like I did one in Camden on Sunday, and it was like Paddy's Day, so it was quite like I was looking at this audience, and it was a stand-up night, and I was like, these guys they're gonna hate this. Like, they are gonna hate this. And it was great. I had so much fun, and everyone was very vocal. It was a bit of a conference. Like, people were screaming stuff out, but it was great, and I loved it. And I think I'm so much better at audience interaction now, and I'm like, sometimes I'll just back at something, I'll be like, God, where'd that come from? Like, God, thank God. But like, where'd that come? But yeah, I think that there probably is that like level of wanting to have a little bit more interaction and kind of keeping me on my toes. And I really felt that final show in Soho, I just didn't quite hit. And I wanted to, and I remember coming back and being like, why did I, like, what went wrong there? And it wasn't like, it didn't go badly or anything. It was just not quite, I didn't feel the space. And I was like, that's because I wasn't with them in it. And I like getting better at that now.
Yeah. It's interesting the way you talk about the character in that once upon a time you played yourself and then you got that feedback and then you created this character. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
now is that the actor in you then playing a part, reading a script, or is it distancing yourself because Clementine can say things that you wouldn't say? It's not you doing it, it's her. So you've got more freedom, you can get away with things if you like.
Yeah.
Are you putting yourself apart from playing a role in that sense?
I think it is. I love that it's a part, and I like the fact that when people don't like the show or when people do like the show,
Yeah.
it can be like, yeah, you liked that, not that you didn't like me. And I think that I think that separation is really important for me, like a writer and as a performer. That it's like, okay, it's not as personal as like you didn't like me, which maybe just makes me a bit like sensitive. But I find that I think if you're a stand-up, that's really difficult because you're talking about your own life, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to show that feels like I'm mining my own experiences. Like obviously it comes from something real, but I wanted it to be like fantasy, and I wanted it to be like something that I could play with as well. And I think what's really nice about the character is that like sometimes the best bits in a show are where like I as a person also acknowledge ridiculousness of that character, like, and I think constantly like being able to break character makes it means that I'm like in on the joke, and I think that's my favorite bit of it, because that's where I think it works best, where it's not like fully acting but it's like caricature.
I like the breaking in and out because it's all, I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It reminds me of a ventriloquist. It's like the character says things that you are then shocked by.
Totally, yeah. Or like I'm like, God, I can't believe I said that, and then I think that's, and I don't actually see a lot of people do it like that. And I think the more and more I've done it, the more I really like being able to do that. And I like the fact that, I mean, sometimes also I put that dress on and I just go on and I'm like, I have no idea where that came from. Like sometimes I have done a show and I'm like, I just feel like I'm completely, like I am completely like lost to this character and it's completely in her hands. And I'm like, I have no idea what I think that being able to kind of go in and out of it is what makes it. Also, you say certain things that people are a bit like, oh, then you can kind of acknowledge it, and they're like, oh, okay, it's ironic.
Well, from your Edinburgh show, you had many reviews, many 5-star reviews, and they've all tried to describe what they've seen. How would you describe for people who don't know Clementine, the show? How would you describe it?
That's a good question. I was actually just looking through some of the reviews for something this morning, and I was like, a lot of them, like, it is that thing of people like struggling to know how to describe it. I think I'd probably describe it as quite like, it is quite like crazy. That's what I describe. It's quite a lot. It's quite overwhelming, I think, and it's a bit of a like assault on the senses. I think it's fun when I go on stage in a set, just being like, I want to take all of these people in. Like, I want to break every single person in this audience in some way. I want them to feel like they're involved in this. Like, I'm like selling world that I want them to buy into. And when they do, like, I love it going to a gig where like I've seen a row of people and then like I'll go on and I'll do something and I'm like, yeah, we got them, like they're in, and I've like this, or like a row of like lads and I've done something and I'm like, yeah, we got them in, like I feel like I've really won them over. And I think that's kind of, in my head, it's like we're all on like a little ship together and we're like sailing through some like mad storm. Like that's kind of how I like the show to feel. And when it's been at its best, it feels like I'm like taking everyone on a little quest. That's kind of how I would describe it. It's quite crazy though. It is probably quite a lot for some people.
Well, for an Edinburgh run that was multiple 5-star reviews, sellout, packed rooms, an extended run at Soho Theatre, I mean, as a debut show, was that remotely on the horizon? Was that part of the plan? Was that what you expected?
No, it's not really, but also like, I don't think I would have continued on with this character or the show if I didn't like really believe in it. And I still believe in it, and I still believe that there's like life in it. And the more gigs I do, the more I'm like, yeah, like this, I love doing this character. I love performing as it. There's so much you can have fun with this world. Like, I can basically just say whatever I want, and like it's great.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people when I was at Fringe were sort of like, oh, you just kind of came out of nowhere, like nobody knew who you were. And I think that I'm now kind of coming to like trying to understand like how the industry works and how, especially when it comes to Fringe, there's certain people who are like pitched as like the acts or the shows that are gonna do really well.
Yeah.
And I think, I see it now with the people that I'm meeting who are going up this year, and I'm like, okay, I see the industry has sort of picked these sort of 10 who are gonna do well. And it's sort of like no matter what happens to their show, like they kind of will do well because there's so much goodwill behind them.
Yeah.
There's like, it's a really strange experience going into Fringe with none of that, and then this weird like industry ceiling.
Yeah.
And I think the more and more I learn about the comedy industry, the more I appreciate how like it's not very common to do as well as I did in that scene.
Yeah.
With the like, I didn't have a production company, I didn't have an agent, I was there on my own.
Yeah.
And like I ended the year as like one of the best like top 10 shows in the Guardian. And like when I look at every other person in that list, it's like they've got teams behind them. And I think on the one hand, like I look back and I'm like, oh, it's amazing that I did that. But I'm also kind of like, why is that so unprecedented? Like that's not what Fringe is about. Like the show that I did is what Fringe is about.
Yeah.
It's about like people who can cobble together something that they've had in their mind, and then they show it to people and people really resonate with it. Like that's what it should be.
Yes.
And it kind of annoyed me that people were like, yeah, you've done like remarkably well, because it kind of suggested that like odds weren't in my favor.
Right.
Yeah, like, and especially I felt like every moment I was still trying to prove myself, like even taking it to Soho.
Yeah.
It's like you still have to prove yourself, and you still, because you weren't ever picked as this like industry princess or something, that you have to keep on proving yourself, which is, it's weird. And I think it's quite reflective of like a bit of a broken industry. Yeah. And I know I'm like so new to it, and I'm sure that could come across to like lots of people as really like, oh, she's just young, she's got no idea, which is probably true. But like my perspective, like going to Fringe should be about bringing shows like that. Yeah. and still being able to like, yeah, it's about word of mouth. And that's also why everyone who's like, oh, what would you do if you're bringing a show to Fringe this year? I've just been like, if the show is good, people will come.
Yes.
And it should still work like that. Like you shouldn't be able to sell out just because you've gone with a particular production company or just because you have a particular agent. Yeah. Like it, you know what I mean? I think so. On the one hand, I think I didn't expect it, but on the other hand, I was kind of like, really going to take this challenge on.
But in a sense, that's a very, very inspiring, positive story, because without having the lobbyists on your side to sort of say, hey, go and see the show, all the press and the PR and all the rest of it, and then having the show break through so enormously, you're basically saying, look, you can do this without all the trumpeting that goes on in the back.
Yeah, it can still be done. Yeah. It can still be done.
Because it's a great show.
I mean, like I did moments where I was like, what am I doing? Like you walk into Pleasance Courtyard and you're like, what am I? It's like, and I hate to say it because obviously like I come into this industry with so much existing privilege, but it does feel a bit like David and Goliath, because you're like taking on and I didn't really even realize what I was taking on. And I think when you kind of look behind the curtain of the mad machinery that is behind some of these like just stand-up shows, people have teams of like 10 people, and they have an hour and a microphone. And like I just had no idea. And I wonder whether there are people who go to Fringe with a show and they're like, God, I didn't even make a mark. And they have no idea that they're like against these like just like massive industrial machines. Yeah. I hope that people came to see my show and they're like, oh, I'm so inspired that you did this, because I want to do this and I want to know that that's still possible for me to do. Yeah. Which I love, and I hope that people still do it. It's just that that they don't hopefully lose all their money as I did.
Is it? I don't know. Is a sense of naivety a good thing going into something like The Fringe because you
Yeah,
don't know the wall of things that you're up against, so you just sort of go, oh, it'll be fine.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I am so glad I didn't know what I know now. And I think I would, because I would never have done it.
Mm,
I wouldn't have dared.
right.
And I think that's also why a lot of people put off their hour for so long. Like especially in
Yeah.
stand up, which is like a little bit different, but I think people build it up because it's so scary when you hear about like the amount of money as well that some people spend on their shows and
Mm,
on their like I heard of someone's stand-up show that they spent like 40 grand on it,
yeah.
and I at least, and
Yeah.
I was like 40 grand on a stand-up show. I literally couldn't believe it. Like it's just playing with these it kind of felt like stepping into the like the gladiatorial arena, but I had no idea that I was doing it, and then suddenly I like woke up and I was like, oh my god, I'm like really playing here. But it was like I I succeeded, so
Yes.
that's great, and I'm really proud of that, and I feel like sometimes I forget how I should hold on to that.
Well, I mean, the obvious question really is where do you go from there? Should we expect the further adventures of Clementine, or do you have to come up with a new character? What's the difficult second album?
Yeah, that is a funny one. I think I was thinking I was like, oh, I'll do a new character, like I'll come up with something different.
Hmm.
And then I was doing gigs as this character, and I was like, oh, do you know what? I do really like her, and I think she's really fun, and I just think you can do so much with that lens, and
Hmm.
you can comment on a lot with it.
Yeah.
So I think I'd love to do a show in 2025 with the same character,
Yeah.
to be like revolution themed. That's where I'm headed with it. I'm like desperate to see her on top of a barricade. Like that's where my brain is going. But also you kind of want to make sure that people don't view as this one thing. But I was also speaking to some others where they were saying there's like a tendency, I think, in comedy for people to always think that they need to do the next thing and
Hmm.
they need to be constantly changing and evolving. And while I think that's important, I also think resting with something that's gone really well and that you're really proud of
Yeah.
is also a good thing. And like, you know, I kind of want to like look at bringing this show to like some places in the UK so I can kind of show it to different areas, like,
Hmm.
train up a bit in like regional audiences as well, because that'll be completely different
Hmm.
to London.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think for the meantime I'm going to stick with her.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit obsessed with performing in gigs as this character at the moment. So I mean, you could talk to me in like a few weeks and I'll be like, nah, give it up. I did try a new character a few weeks ago, and I'd been hired for this. I'd been booked for this gig, and it was a really big gig. I was like 200 people there, and I just decided to do something completely different.
Hmm.
And we were only given like 3 minutes. It was a bit of a disastrous. Well, the show went well, like the character went well, but I was kind of like, why am I risking it all for this right now? But yeah, maybe a new character. I need some time.
Yeah.
I need some time.
In the show itself, obviously lots of people are drawing parallels. I wanted to know where you came from with it, in the sense that, oh, this character, is she really ditzy, or is this allegory, is this metaphor? When you went in to make the show, were you thinking, I want to do a ditzy, zany character, or were you thinking, I want to make a very specific socio-political comment with this?
I think I always wanted to do something that was like a historical pastiche
Yeah.
because I love history.
Yeah.
And I think the initial inspiration was like I did a video in 2020 during COVID.
Yeah.
Like, there's lots of Regency stuff on TV, and I was like, oh, it'd be really funny if there's just like this kind of mad girl writing a love letter. Then I get kind of like went through in my own personal life, was like going through a breakup, and through that was just looking at the way in which like we as a society like look at love
Yeah.
and look at romance, and how that's still something that is quite pervasive, especially for like young girls and young women.
Mhm.
And I just think there's just so much to take the piss out of. Like it's so funny, it's ridiculous, and
Yeah.
it's so. And I think the more and more I did it, the more I was like coming up to all of these. And like I studied, like one of my specialisms at uni was like looking at the Romantic Revolution
Mhm.
and looking at the way in which like romantic love is like a massive, construct of the 1800s or like 1700s. So I just always thought that was really interesting, and I think the character just massively developed from there. And then and I think it's quite difficult sometimes with characters to make it feel like you're not just doing crazy stuff for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Then also I just wanted it to be really fun, and
Yeah.
I wanted to make a show that I think obviously it's like such a thing in the fringe world of people being like, I'm going to make a show about something quite traumatic, and then like, 2/3 through the show it suddenly gets incredibly dark.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make something that people left and they were like, that was so silly, I had so much fun. So that was kind of always at the forefront of my mind. Like I didn't want it to be like randomly really traumatic or like really sad.
Yeah.
But I did want it to have like a little bit of heart. Even performing the character and doing the show felt very like empowering for me, because I was like doing my own writing and I was taking up space, and it was helping me kind of understand who I was a little bit. So I found it quite emotional when I first started performing it.
Yeah.
Like now I think I've come past that, and now I can kind of go a bit crazier with it, because it's got less like I think it's probably got a little bit less heart than it used to, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because initially, because it was quite raw, I think, initially for me.
Yeah.
And now I think I've still got it there, but not that much.
We mentioned obviously about doing the Fringe, your festival experience as part of the review, and now your more recent experience. I mean, how has your experience of festival or festivals overall been?
Ooh, obviously, like performing as a student is like so chilled, and I didn't really realize it at the time. I mean, when I went in like 2018, that I went and did a review show. I had the best time, and it was so fun.
Yeah.
But it's like it's a completely different kettle of fish when you're going with your own money and your own show. But I had a great time last year as well, and I met some amazing people. I think I got the sense from talking to other people that it felt like less like debuts going last year, so it felt like there was a bit more space for like new people.
Right.
And I just met loads of really great people, and I felt like I love the atmosphere, because especially at Fringe, it feels like you're a real community, and it feels like every day, like what a treat. You can get up and the only thing you have to think about is like doing a show.
Yeah.
And I love that. I thought it was like a dream come true, really, because it's like all I have to think about is like, right, I'm going to go sell some tickets. I'm going to get some flyers out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get to perform an hour in front of like hopefully an audience, but like, sometimes you're not that lucky, and we've all been there. It's also, I think, a bit of a mindset thing. Like, again, if you get into this headspace of it being like super competitive, and you've got reviewers coming and all of that, like I think it can become quite hellish. Like festival, I think especially Edinburgh can become really like it can really get to you. Yeah. Especially because you're tired and you're like poor, and you're you might have got a bad review, and then but I kind of went in with an attitude of being like, I just want to make this show really good. And I want to make the show really fun. And when I succeeded in doing that, which I didn't always, like sometimes I wasn't happy with how it went, or I didn't perform my best, but I think I kind of tried to keep that at the forefront of my mind. And then I had a really good time.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, obviously everyone's talking about how expensive it is. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's just like one of the only reasons I was able to do it last year is because my friend's family are from Edinburgh, so I stayed with her dad in her like family home, which meant that I had no accommodation costs, which was obviously a dream come true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved it. I had so much fun. I was just sort of blind to all of it, really. I was just wandering around like completely none the wiser. So it was great. Yeah, I had a good time.
And what did you do with your in between show time? Did you go and see other shows? Did you take time out for yourself?
Yeah, I did. I wish I'd seen more, because I think the show itself was like really exhausting, and I have I always get sick. So I got really sick midway through the festival. I had to cancel one of the shows, which was such a shame. And then I did a couple of shows really sick, which were not my best. I went to go see shows. I did a lot of drinking in between shows. I tried to like limit it, especially because I was singing in the show. I didn't want to lose my voice, but it was very difficult to not get swept away. Drinking, like lots of chatting. I think there's also sort of like existential crises in the middle of the day that take up quite a few hours. You know, you might be having a crisis, you go meet someone else who's having a crisis. Like there's a lot of that going on. I did have like a ritual that I did every morning, which was like probably the most unhealthy ritual in the world, which is like a Greg's every morning. And I got into the habit of it. And then I was like, if I don't have a Greg's, it's going to go badly. And so then I was like, well, I have to have a Greg's every morning. And so every morning I went in and she was like, you're back. And I'm like, I'm back. Because if I stop, the show's going to go badly. And she was like, that's not healthy in any. This is not healthy for you. This is not good. Yeah. But that was like vaguely how I ran my day.
Yeah. No, I went to Greg's every morning, but it wasn't for superstition. It was just because it was cheap and it was close by.
Yeah, it was cheap. It's also so cheap. It's the only thing that you can just like pick up on your way.
Yeah,
it's like right in the center. It's great. I loved it. I felt like every time I like got my Greg's, I was like, okay, right, I'm like telling my brain to start getting ready for it.
Do you go and see other shows, and how do you watch those shows? Do you watch them as an audience member or do you watch them as a comedian?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I have stuff that I definitely went to go see at Fringe last year, and then someone did something and I was like, oh, I really liked that.
Yeah,
I really liked what they did there. I don't know, like, and then I kind of would go home and be like, how can I, like, whether it was a bit of audience participation or something that they did where I was like, I loved that.
Yeah.
And then I kind of tried to incorporate it into my show. But generally I just kind of wanted to be like super supportive because I think sometimes there's a tendency of like comedians will go and watch each other and then be quite like sour-faced in the back row. Whereas like I'm just, every show I went to go see, I was like, I know how hard this is. And like, even if it's going great or it's not going great, like that very act of like getting yourself on stage for an hour in front of like a bunch of strangers is just, it's terrifying. So I was just like constantly trying to be like a super great audience member and try to be really supportive and like try to go and see new things. And I didn't actually see that much last year. I probably went to see like 2 shows a day at least. But it was just, I also did kind of find it like if my show had gone badly, I found it really hard to go and watch a show later on in the day because I would be like bitter about it going well. But I think if a show had gone great, I would drink way more and I'd go and see way more. And if it had gone badly, I'd go and like take myself off to a dark room and cry.
Well, it's interesting because again, there's 2 things there. There's the energy that goes into Clementine's character, and then there's the ritualistic side of, you know, if it's good, celebrate, and if it's bad, weep, and then, you know, your daily Greg's. I mean, is it nervous energy? Do you get that kind of pre-show anxiety, that sort of thing?
Yeah, yes, 100%. It's like, obviously as you settle into the run, like, you know, you've got the lights are there, like there becomes a bit of a routine of like everyone knows what they're doing. But like I'm in the morning, I'm like wrangling my flyers. I'm like I had hired these like teens to fly for me, but it meant that I was like I had to be out there. And luckily, when it started selling out, like there was a couple of weeks where I was like, great, we've sold out for at least the next few days. So I could kind of like relax on the producing side of it. You know, there's often days where I go out and I was like putting out posters, I was doing gigs, I was like, I had to have like this real producer hat on. I was like getting spare props, I was like fixing lights, and all of a sudden I look at the clock and I'm like, oh God, I got 10 minutes to get like my dress on and I get my makeup on. And then, you know, I'm looking at reviews, I'm sharing stuff on social media, I'm like also being my like one woman like marketing team. It was quite a lot. And then you're on and you're doing a show, and now I'm like, that's why people have producers, and I get this now. But that was really hard, and especially if something had gone wrong, or there's anything, you know, someone's late, something happens, to be the like the decision maker and the person who's going to solve everything, whilst also having this like, constant anxiety of having to perform,
Yeah.
it's like quite difficult to balance, I think.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit about the competitiveness, with your show competing with hundreds of comedy shows, thousands of shows overall at the Fringe. How do you feel in terms of competitiveness? Are you a competitive person naturally?
I think so. I think I weirdly didn't feel that competitive at the Fringe last year, and I think that really helped me. I think like I really tried to like stay like in my own lane a bit.
Yeah.
But it's really hard not to compare yourself. And I think in this industry is just like completely like built on it. You're constantly looking ahead at people who've gotten something that you haven't, or gotten further than you have. And I do it so much at the moment, and I need to be better at looking back and being like, oh, actually, like if I compare where I was last year, like I'm in a great position. Like I didn't even dream I'd be able to get this far.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to always like take stock of how far you've come, but it is really hard. I think I'm naturally quite competitive with myself,
Right.
and I'm like quite hard on myself. So if a show hasn't, like, I definitely had some shows at Soho where I was like really angry at myself, and then my tech guy would be like, it was great, it was fine, you don't need to be like stressing this much.
Yeah.
But then I think sometimes like being a perfectionist is kind of also unfortunately what then makes the show really good. And I think having that nature is like both terrible, and also it can be the thing that makes it better than it would usually be. So yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think.
What about this year then? Are you going back to Edinburgh?
Yes, I'm going to do a week of my original show in the first week, and then maybe a few gigs and things like that. But I'm not going to go for the whole month.
Yeah.
Mainly also because I just can't afford to. It took me a really long time to do the first show and to get it to a place where and it's still, like there's still times where I'm performing it, I'm like, this isn't perfect, I wish I could change this. So I want to like properly take time to do another one, and know that I can definitely, I think my aim would be to take a show next year and feel like I can, feels like I know what I'm doing.
Well, what then so far have been the worst and the best individual moments in comedy?
Oh my God, what a question. Unfortunately, like the amount of like bad memories that have just flooded to my brain right now are like overwhelming. Oh my God, there are so many to pick from. There's so many. God, there are actually so many. I did a gig before I left for Edinburgh last year, where I was I was at the beginning of the lineup, and like I just really should never be at the beginning of the lineup. And I was like, I don't think that this is going to go well. And it was just one of the worst gigs of my life. Like I just completely died, and there was no way of getting it back. Like it was really awful. And I got out on stage. I got to the backstage. I just started to burst into tears. So I was like, Edinburgh for a month. Like, is every day going to be like this? Like, and I just was like, God, what am I going to do? Do I cancel it? Like, that was pretty awful. Oh God, I think there's like it's weird because sometimes I think the better that you do, the more stressful it becomes, which is kind of a shame because you kind of put more pressure on yourself. But the best moment, I think, like there was a couple of shows at Soho which were like, I was like, oh yeah, I've really improved. I feel like people really enjoyed it. I had a great time, and I like got home and I was like, oh, that was like the most fun I've ever had. Like not even on stage, just like ever. Kind of thing that means like you're in the right direction and you're doing what you want to do. And I think sometimes you really need to like hold on to those moments, especially when like, you might not be getting the opportunities that you need, or, you're looking for a reason to kind of keep going in this industry.
Yeah.
And I'll like always look back to those shows as like a kind of light that was like, yeah, that was worth it. And it was worth all the work I put into it. And yeah, it was great. It felt like I'd earned it, which was good.
Yeah. So is there a single most important lesson that you think you've learned so far? What feeds your philosophy going forward?
I think I need to tell myself this bit more as well, is that like I would say that you should always, like, you should, in just in life but also in this industry, I think you should always follow your gut. And I think you should always make stuff that you would want to see. Like that's always been Like I made a show I would have enjoyed.
Yeah.
And that I think is the most important thing, because if you're making a show and you're making jokes that you wouldn't laugh at,
Yeah.
then even if the audience are enjoying it, that's not. I mean, you know, some people might do that and some people might enjoy that, but at least for me, I can then stand behind it and be like, well, I would have liked that. So
yeah,
I'm making the show that I want, and it was because I go and see stuff sometimes and then I'm like, I actually love that. I don't know why, but I want to make stuff that I would like. I want to make stuff for me, basically, or for people like me.
Yeah.
I think that should always be your guiding principle, because it can be easy, I think, to make stuff that you think people will like.
Yeah.
And you might make stuff that people do like, but if you don't like it, I think that you get to a point where like it's tough to perform it then.
Yeah. Do you keep bits in your set or your show for that reason, because you like them, even if they don't necessarily land?
Oh God, yeah, 100%. There is always stuff in there that I'm like, this is never going to work, but I love it. But also equally, there are jokes in there that like my favorite jokes, but they always do really well, and it like gives me momentum, and that's nice. And I think that you have to make that kind of weigh up those things. Like you have to earn the weird stuff. But I think I'm getting better at doing that, and like gauging like the sort of stuff I like and my style of like writing and things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm still just like massively learning as well. So I think hopefully it's all just gonna make me better and help me improve. But I'm still like, getting there.
Well, we've talked about inspiration and self-improvement. So are there people who've inspired you or who continue to inspire you?
In comedy or just in general?
In life.
In life. I think that like it's important to always look at like what your peers are doing. Like in comedy, I think that like sometimes that competitiveness and looking ahead can be really good, because you're like, oh great, okay, that like someone's just got that, which means it's possible, which means that I should still keep going.
Yeah.
Like that can actually be such a great driver. You just have to make sure that it doesn't kind of like overwhelm you. So there's like other people who I'm looking at who are doing amazing things, and I'm like, oh, I find that really inspiring, because it means that it's possible for me. And I think I kind of think to my grandma isn't alive anymore, but I definitely find her inspiring, because she kind of had an attitude to like her creative life that was very like, I wouldn't say it was like delusional, but it was very much like, I'm not going to take like no for an answer. So she was an artist later on, like after she finished her career, and she had like one art lesson and then like immediately was doing a gallery viewing. And I just think that is so like because she's just like, yeah, I'm gonna just do it. And I still think about that. I think that's so funny. And I think it's kind of quite similar to the attitude I had to my fringe show. I was like, I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah, you got this.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah. So I find that quite inspiring. I think about that quite a lot, actually.
Love that. So how can we find out about you and where we can come and see you perform?
I'm having a little look at like more dates of the show that I can put in, and looking at different places I'm going to do that in the UK. It's going to be hopefully announced soon. But yeah, you can find me online, on Instagram, and on, I mean, Lord knows I'm trying to make TikToks, but probably don't find me there yet. But yeah, you can follow me on Instagram and see what I'm up to, and I'm going to put some dates, and I'll be at Fringe this year as well, which will for the first week. So I'm excited to do that.
And so then my last question, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
Oh, I would say you have to be like absolutely mad to do it. That is what I would, that's all I'll say. Yeah.
Fair enough. Rosie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.